I'm Jason McBride. I'm the assistant head of school at that school, equivalent to a deputy principal in many of your schools by nomenclature. I have a colleague here, Mohammed Al-Maghrabi, who is our secondary school Arabic head, and so he's here at the end should we have any questions that require translation. So let's begin. So today's model and today's presentation hopefully echoes a little bit about what we heard in the debate this morning, which is a top-down or bottom-up approach. As educators, we know mostly that our life works in the gray, which is the area in between. And so hopefully you see here how a top-down approach through vision and a bottom-up approach in standardization or an agreement on the criteria came to a happy middle ground where we meet both of those needs of the top-down and the bottom-up. First is the context. We were asked to introduce the school because we come from a diverse group of schools here as we are today. We come from Indian curriculum, British curriculum, American, IB, and everything in between and outside of those categories. GEMS World Academy, as you can tell by the name, is one of the GEMS families of schools. We're an IB World School. Many people that are familiar with the IB are familiar with the diploma program and equate that to the last 2 years, either year 12 and 13 or grade 11 and 12, depending on your system. We also run the primary years program in the elementary and the middle years program in the grades 6 to 10, what we call grades 6 to 10. So we have a whole school commitment to inquiry-based learning, authentic education, authentic assessment. So that's just kind of how the school functions. We're a fully authorized school at all 3 levels. We did that in our first 3 years, which was a lot of paperwork. And to go along with that paperwork, we're also CIS accredited. So if schools are CIS accredited, they've gone through that process as well of self-study. We like to joke that over the first 4 years of the school, we were inspected 11 times between IB, pre-auth and auth, CIS, pre-accreditation and accreditation, and KHDA, which we all know and love. I like the room already. We are a pre-K to 12 school. Our pre-K is the 3-year-old program, so we start with 3-year-olds and we graduate at 18, and we're co-educational. We're a pretty even split. We're about 1,500 students right now. Next year we're expecting about 1,700 students. So the school's grown very, very quickly. And the school's grown in such a way that it really lends a great platform for being an IB school. There's 80 nationalities. Now a lot of the schools in the country have that kind of diversity, but not too many don't have a dominant group. Our largest group is 9.5%. Our largest nationality is 9.5%. So it's a very eclectic mix. Great platform with which to promote the IB ideals of international mindedness and exploring our world. And this is our 5th year in operation. So what we're talking about today is something that we're very proud of as a school because it was done as a school and it was done with our colleagues and not to our colleagues. And that's an important difference to kind of talk about. When we talk about teacher growth and supervision, we use those 2 words very purposefully because we believe that the formal observation, the goal setting, the year-end reviews, the informal observations, all the dialogue that comes during the course of the year really has two purposes. One is that bottom-up approach to growth, which is making or facilitating our teachers becoming better teachers for the sake of student learning. All right? So teacher growth is important to improve learning. The other half of that is supervision, and as our young students, not young, I guess they're senior students, talked about this morning in the debate, accountability is always something that rests at the top of the pyramid. As much as we like to flatten the pyramid and make it as sort of a dissolved power structure as possible, you still have accountability. You still have one person at the end of the year that has to say, you are good enough to go, and this person is not, and you're good enough to stay, and this person is not, and they have to go. So we know that accountability is part of the system. So we're very forward in saying, these are the 2 purposes. There's no point in trying to fool teachers to say it's all about teacher growth if the process is used as a summative chopping block to get rid of people, right? Teachers are smarter than that. We were smarter than that when we were teachers, right? So we talk about the dual purposes. Now what we wanted to do this year, we wanted to have one system, one language, pre-K to 12. So that everybody could have apples-to-apples conversations about what good teaching practice looked like, all right? From 3-year-olds and center-based learning right through to grade 12 with syllabus-driven diploma program curriculum, okay? So we wanted one system, and 2 of the guiding practices that we had, or guiding thoughts that we had was, we wanted it to be based on best practice, not a practice, because we believe that creating our own things organically based on others' practice before us ends up being something that is contextually relevant for us. And we also want it to be KHDA friendly because KHDA is here and that's a process that we need to go through and adhere to as a school based in Dubai. So in order to base our system that we were going to develop on best practice, we took a look at a lot of different systems around the world and compared several frameworks. What we ended up choosing was Charlotte Danielson's A Framework for Teaching. Anybody familiar with that? Does anybody know Charlotte Danielson's work? Primarily, she's through the ASCD, which is an American association for school and curriculum development. Fantastic stuff that she puts forward. A lot of people from the other side of the pond, our side of the world, through Europe, aren't familiar with her stuff the same way that a lot of North Americans, some Canadians, aren't familiar with stuff that goes on around the world. But if you're interested in teacher supervision, which I would imagine you are since you chose this one and not something else, you may want to just take a look at her framework for teaching. She's now in her 3rd iteration, and it's just fantastic work. Now, why we chose Charlotte Danielson's work is for a couple of reasons. One of them that's not on here is we already had the most experience and knowledge on staff of this framework, which was important, right? Because there's no point finding a great framework if nobody speaks that language already. So we were an appreciative inquiry sort of approach, which is one of the keynotes this morning talked about. An appreciative inquiry approach builds on where you are and takes it forward. The framework is great stuff. It's research, peer-reviewed. It's wonderful stuff. But we already had existing knowledge within the faculty. And we also felt like it was most comprehensive for everything that a teacher says and does. A lot of the time in schools, if you look around at models and you look at the formal evaluation process or the summative process, it focuses very heavily, as it should, on teaching and learning, right? But we know as a teacher, a lot of the times what takes up most of your time, communication with families, dealing with misbehavior, building culture and climate, preparation for the lesson, pulling in community resources, and that doesn't show up a lot of the time on teaching and learning rubrics when I come in for my 45 to 1 hour long visit. Part is the most important of what we do, but all those other parts often aren't incorporated into other frameworks. So we chose hers as a launching pad. Danielson's framework has what she calls 4 domains. There are 4 big areas with which we view teaching and learning as a whole, or sorry, the teaching practice as a whole. The first one largely encompasses the things you would talk about in a pre-observation meeting, which is the planning and preparation. And it has to do with things like how well does the teacher know their content and pedagogy? How well does the teacher reflect that they know their students and they're not doing a one-size-fits-all lesson, but they know that Abdullah needs a little bit of this, and Mariam needs this, and Joe, well, he's way down here, so we're going to do something different with him. So it reflects that kind of conversation and guides the conversation pre-observation. So that's preparation and planning. Classroom environment reflects the stuff that a lot of the time when you go in to see, you feel first before you actually find the evidence for it. It's the culture and climate of the classroom. It's how students are treating one another, how they're interacting with one another, and interacting with the teacher or teaching assistants. It's how they follow classroom procedures. It's how teachers handle behavior, and of course the other side of that, which I was always involved in as a child, misbehavior. It has to do with all of that stuff, how you arrange the furniture to maximize learning. So it takes into account all those things that, again, teachers do that isn't just about teaching literacy, teaching numeracy, teaching content, knowledge, or skills. Okay? The third domain is perhaps the most traditional, is what you're actually seeing in the classroom, and it's the instruction. And it talks about things like assessment for learning. It talks about the quality of communication. Can the teacher be understood? Are they communicating clear objectives? Are they reassessing those objectives at the end? Are they taking questions? Are they asking higher order questions or questions that take the standard of learning up higher? So the instruction one is fairly well known to people who are here, I would imagine, because it's what we look for in great teaching and learning. And then the fourth one is the one that we've actually found this year to be very useful, despite us not thinking that it would be when we launched the framework. Because the fourth one has to do with things like communication with families. It has to do with things like their own professional learning. Those things we haven't struggled with. But as an IB school, or as a school that has a very transparent teaching and learning focus, we expect people to work together, right? I think most of us would say that our schools are expected to be collaborative. I think it's one of those things that we just expect now. And in the fourth domain, there's a column on how you collaborate with peers. And that's enabled us to have, as we'll see on another slide, really tough conversations that are depersonalized. Because it's not about what I think, it's about what this rubric says, okay? Now, if the rubric was just, if we had taken Charlotte Danielson's stuff and we said, here, boom, this is what you're expected to do, a lot of people who are really confident with their practice would say, okay, it's another program. Some people are going to be the resistors. You always have the bottom 5 or bottom 10% who are just going to be, maybe negative for no reason. But what we did is went beyond Charlotte Danielson's work to collaboratively, and that's why it's called how we collaboratively redesigned our teacher growth and supervision model. This is what Charlotte Danielson looks like. This is just one domain. You can see how she's divided up into 4 levels: unsatisfactory, basic, proficient, distinguished, which is very similar to our KHDA indicators. And then she just has the components down the side. Okay? The reason that we're talking about this being a collaborative process is because we wanted to make it ours. So using Danielson as a base, we had to then put on the hats of the many masters that we serve, right? As many of us do. You serve a board, you serve your family constituencies, you serve KHDA. If you have external accreditations or authorizations, you have to wear a lot of hats as a school. For us as a school, as an IB World school, we have to meet what are called the IB standards and practices. So we took Charlotte Danielson's work, and then we had to layer the IB standards and practices, the CIS standards for accreditation, the GEM standards for education, and KHDA standards 3.1, 3.2, and 3.3 that we know so well, which are teaching, learning, and good. So there we go. That, if you take nothing home, at least you know that. All right. So we had to take all of those and layer it over top. Now, in order to be truly collaborative, it doesn't mean you have to involve everybody, right? Because that's consensus. That's actually beyond collaboration. But we wanted to have collaboration involve all 150 of our teachers and 17 administrators. Okay. So we wanted everybody involved. Now, the idea when I first brought this up, the rest of the SLT was like, okay, you're crazy. Great goal, but how are we going to do that? And we actually figured out a way together to make it happen quite simply and over in less than 3 hours. So, like I said at the opening, we wanted to co-create with the entire staff so that it's our expectations as a school, the whole community, rather than just the admin doing to them. We wanted to do with them. In one of the more recent educational leadership magazines that the ASCD puts out, they had an article or a blurb that was talking about the difference between creating buy-in and co-creating. And what you see right now in a lot of the articles coming out is buy-in is the term we used to use with as leaders, that we wanted to get buy-in from the teachers to say, yeah, we can do that, yeah, we believe in that. The problem with buy-in is there's still a coercive feel to it, right? Whether you buy in or not, we're going to do this. So that term is genuinely being replaced by co-creation. So we collaboratively co-created the document because it wasn't what I believed or you believed, it's what we believe. We're very fortunate that our board has said, every Thursday is an early release. Children go home at 1:30. From 2 to 4 o'clock, we have PD every week. Very, very lucky. Okay, very fortunate, and we know that. So what we did on that Thursday, one Thursday afternoon, is we did a whole group launch to tell the whole staff, we want to come up with a common language. We want it to be reflective of all the different things that we are as a school, and make it a GWA-based evidence of teaching rubric. We divided up into 30 groups of 5, and each group went all over the place. They were in classrooms, they were in auditoriums, they were all over the place, but there were 30 groups of 5. And what we did to make sure that we narrowed the focus was, in a rubric, I guess what we're taught or what we know is that on a 4-level rubric, the 3 is kind of what's expected, what you're aiming at, right? The 4 goes beyond, the 2 is not quite there yet, the 1 is red flag, need help, okay? What we did then, instead, if we had given those groups the entire rubric, they would have had so many columns to go through and wordsmith and discuss, cuss, debate, and then edit down, right? So what we did is we took the good only column, figuring that if they could agree on what is expected as a 3, as a good, within both the KHDA nomenclature and our own school, then everything else can be ramped up and ramped slightly down. But if we got agreement on good, we were in good place. So the team spent an hour and a half that day going through the rubric from domain 1 to 4. Half of them, of course, we turned around and went the other way, 4 to 1, because we didn't want everybody to start at 1. They only got through 2.5, and 3 and 4 didn't get taken a look at. So we started them in opposite directions, and most of them got through all of it. Some of them didn't, but we had a good representation from across the groups. Something like 26 of the 30 groups got through the entire process. And what they did is they debated, edited, and made changes to that good column so that it reflected those different masters we serve, IB, CIS, GEMS, and KHDA. That gave us 30 edited versions. Now, if you've ever done something like this and tried to get 30 versions of something that you collate, it's not fun, it's not easy, and it still doesn't give rise to conversation and dialogue that can happen by whittling it down a little bit further. So what we did is, in a department head meeting, we had 20 groups of 4 groups of 5, and each group took 6 of those edited down versions and got it down to 1. So not only were we able to distribute the leadership and promote sort of the authority or the representation of the HODs, we were able to whittle it down to 4 versions, which was a lot easier to collate then as an SLT than 30 versions where it was all over the shop. So now in 90 minutes plus 45, so in a little over 2 hours, we've managed to have every teacher in the building be involved in what good is. Now they know what good is because they've worked with it. Then their representatives as HODs had a chance to whittle it down. Then we took it back to the admin team because, as we know, the accountability piece in the teacher growth and supervision, it has to represent what our standard, our belief about teaching should be. But you know what? It comes back, and outside of a few minor tweaks, we couldn't have come up with anything better ourselves. Okay. So what we did is this. It looks very similar to Charlotte's, and there's a reason for that. Is because it's her work, and everything's properly footnoted in our actual handbook, but not here. It's cut off. Is we come up with the KHDA rankings and very similar components. Some of these were changed a little bit, but you can see where we changed some. So Charlotte Danielson's work in the top box for good. Teacher demonstrates good understanding of the content and its relationships and connections with other disciplines and the world. Teachers' instructional practices reflect current inquiry-based pedagogical knowledge and IB philosophy. What that said previously was, the teacher demonstrates good understanding of the content and its relationships and connections with other disciplines, full stop, and that was it. So you can see how we took the IB piece and pushed an inquiry-based part in there, because that's what we believe as a school is our pedagogical sort of bedrock. That probably the vast majority of people would describe as just good teaching practice. So some of them we didn't have to change, but some of them we did. One of those was in Domain 3 in instruction. The only place that we added to Charlotte's framework was the student responsibility and awareness of their own learning. And if that sounds familiar to anybody, it's because KHDA really does focus on it by going through and asking students, what are you doing? How are you doing? How does this relate to what you did before? What will you do next? We get those questions a lot with our students. And so we felt that that was the only thing in 3.1, 3.2, or 3.3 that wasn't already reflected in there that we needed to add full out. So I can tell you how happy KHDA was that we actually took it and could show that we actually used it instead of doing our own thing entirely. So that was one that we added in. Other than that, it stayed pretty standard with tweaking towards the things that we needed to serve. So putting it to good use. So the so what question is always a big one, right? So you know something, or so you have something, so what do you do with it? Well, what we did is what we did was create a pre-K to 12 common language with common expectations. Everybody across the board knew what we were expecting. The year prior to that, we had a PYP framework, an MYP framework, and a DP framework. And like I said, you can't have conversations on a Thursday afternoon that are so focused when everybody's aiming at a slightly different point. So what we did with this is we decided to use it as this co-created base everywhere we possibly could. And if you have any kind of PD or you have any kind of strategic plan and it doesn't relate to one of those elements, it probably doesn't relate much to your school. So we kind of said, you know, if it doesn't show up in the rubric somewhere, then why are we doing it? So the first thing we did was, after everybody co-created it, we wanted them to use it for a teacher self-assessment. What that did was the teachers then saw the final product and saw the tool that we were going to be going in and basing our post-observation reflective feedback on them, right? So it was great for them to participate. If we had taken that as a finished product, great, because everybody would have had a chance to edit it, but they would never have seen it before you started going into classes to do the formal observation. So we used it as a teacher self-assessment. So they got a chance to go through and self-identify, all of a sudden I've always thought I was good, but based on the rubric, I'm actually unacceptable, so that's something that I need to focus on, all right? So what we did with that was just put it into a quick sheet like this. They had a copy of the full rubric, but this was just a quick one-page sheet. Anything more than one page, and teachers stopped filling it out, right? So we tried to condense it as much as possible. And this gives them a chance, and as you see, it talks about what the purpose is. Teachers use this tool in conjunction with a rubric to self-assess current teaching practice in order to develop meaningful professional learning goals. So what we did then, after they did a self-assessment, was tie it to our teacher goal-setting process. We set goals in late September, early October, depending on how many holidays there are in a given September. Then we review it in February, March, and then we review it again in June, and it's part of the end-of-year summary process. But for teacher goal setting, we tied it to, again. So we had them start with the areas of strength. So they do the self-assessment, They say, yeah, wow, according to this rubric, I'm outstanding in these 7 of 23 areas or 24 areas. That's wonderful. We had them write down, domain by domain, where are you the strongest? So what does that do to teachers for the rest of the document? How does it make them feel? Positive, yeah, good. It makes them feel good, right? They're starting with a strengths-based approach. No different than a kid when you give them feedback. I like this, but this probably needs a little bit of tweaking, right? So they started with self-identified areas of strength. What that also gave us was a bank of great practice throughout the school. So now it's self-identified, so it's not going to be 100% in agreement with the people who are watching you. But if you look and you think you're outstanding at something, chances are you're no worse than good. If you're unacceptable and you think you're outstanding, it's a long conversation with your principal or your division leader, all right? But that gave us a bank, so our PD people took that, created an internal bank, and that became the method of saying, you're struggling with questioning, you might want to go talk to Rhonda or Mark, because they are great at questioning. So it created a peer, it led to everything. It was just, I'm so jealous of ourselves. I'm so biased because I'm really proud of what's happened because of the conversation. But that gave us so many strengths to work from. Then of course we switch, and with goal setting, a lot of the times you're building on areas that you need to improve. So they self-identified the possible areas of growth, and then they had 3 goals below, and they were all an area for growth related to the domain and component. So again, they had to go back to the language of the rubric to see where they thought that they weren't matching up against the rubric, which we all created and all said, this is what good teaching looks like. So quite, it's our first year, so there's always tweaks, but we're quite proud of how that's rolled out, and feedback from teachers, as we know, is often balanced, good and bad, has been largely positive. Our teachers don't hold back their opinions at our school. So if we just heard positive things, then we can be pretty sure it's gone well. Formal observations is what most people would equate to teacher growth and supervision or teacher supervision. I wish we had longer to go through this. I'm going to go through it quickly, and if you ever want to know more about it, you can let me know. Because what we decided as a group is one of the problems with teacher evaluation is taking the data that you get from your anecdotal notes or your records and turning it into meaningful data, right? There's often a disconnect between it being able to say 74% of our teachers are good in higher order questioning, 22% are acceptable, so we're going to work with those teachers on higher order questioning, It's that kind of quick access to information that we would all love to have to help guide other decisions. So this is what we did. We took our formal evaluation sheet and we built it into Google Survey. So has anybody used Google Forms before? If you haven't, I'm going to tell you something that will absolutely change your life. If all you've heard so far is Charlie Brown's teacher up here going, listen now because this will change your life for free. How about that? Now we sound like Tony Robbins up here. It's going to change your life for free in 7 easy installments. What we did is we took our teaching rubric and we created a Google survey form, which allows you put in a question, and then you have responses underneath. You can be multiple choice, open-ended, whatever you want to do. What we did is we took the rubric. You can just see it here. I didn't go down far enough. But we took the name of the teacher, the people who do the formal observations at our school, that's the principals and assistant principals, the date of the observation, and the division, because that way we can disaggregate later by phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4 for when our KHG friends show up. Grade level observed, the subject, so we can take a look at language across the school, math across the school, Arabic across the school, as we like. And then down here, you can just see where demonstrating knowledge of content and pedagogy. That's the first domain. You just tick the box, U, A, O, or U, A, G, or O, as it lines up with what you saw in the class that day and what you got from the pre and post observation, right? You roll it all in there, you hit enter. It literally takes 30 seconds to fill out the survey. Our formal observers have done it in a bunch of different ways.
Can you please scroll down?
I can't because it's a screenshot. But I may have a shot in the next slide. But hold on a second, okay? It's in the handout as well at the bottom. Oh no, it's not because I couldn't layer them over. My fault. Next presentation. What it's done is some people have used this through their iPad. So they go sit in a class and they tick, 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 tick in an iPad. No typing, right? No keys clicking. One of our division principals uses a laptop so she can type notes as she's watching and just highlight the text that she's seeing. Some other ones have just gone in with paper and pencil copy, circled and scribbled because it's quiet and not obtrusive. To me, the idea of a laptop screen being up is a bit of a barrier, so I would rather scribble on paper and go back and transfer it. But what it's done is this. is you hit a button, you hit show summary of responses, and at any one time, it pops out the percentage of that across your school. It's amazing and it's free, you know? It's such an easy way to do things. I have a very good friend who's the head of technology at the lab school. It's a big technology-driven school in Toronto. They've thrown out all of their educational software and built everything on Google free platforms, because there's nothing really that Google can't do that somebody else won't charge you money for and give you less support with, right? So as you go back to your school, start talking to your technology people. If you don't have a tech person, talk to somebody who's tech literate, or talk to the students and ask them how to use Google Survey. A wonderful way to be able to gather data quickly without much fuss. So we can see, so for instance, this was a snapshot from about 6 weeks ago, I think. And so we can see, let's say we're coming up to a Thursday PD session and we want to know what to focus on. We can either take a chunk of time, or we can look at the whole course of the year. So right now I look here and look at setting instructional outcomes. So it's a 0, 20%, 65%, 15%, okay? Kind of a normal spread. Knowledge of resources, 0, 3, 89, and 8. For me, I probably wouldn't do anything on resources across the school with that, because the percentage of people who are good or outstanding is 97%. I'd be pretty happy with that, right? So we can take a look. So for me, if I looked at setting instructional outcomes and designing coherent instruction, wonderful tool. I could do a whole session on just how Google really has changed things for our administration and our PD this year, but that's the quickest snapshot, okay? Google Forms. Informal drop-ins are another way that we've changed it. So at our school, much to KHTA's chagrin, we don't use our HODs, much like our British school, our British colleagues do, the HODs for formal evaluation. We use them for informal observation to do, to sort of lend credibility with the content, knowledge, and understanding, but they're not involved in the formal observation. But we knew that we wanted to get HODs involved and we wanted to get curriculum people involved. And so the informal drop-in observations took a couple of the key criteria that we were looking for that you should be able to see in a class anytime you drop in for 10 minutes, right? So things like class climate, questioning techniques, feedback, things like that, our student engagement. Those are things that you can just drop in and see at any one time. You're not always going to drop in and see all things at all times, and that's kind of the downfall with formal observations, right? So our informal drop-in spread the view of what teaching and learning looked like at our school, while still reserving the formal observations for people who have been formally trained as educational leaders. We use it at the mid-year review with the goals, and then year-end summaries. By the time we've gone through this process, people know exactly what's expected of them, and the year-end summaries aren't new. There's nothing new that comes out of it. You've gotten data all year. You know what the rubric is, so there's no conversations. You know, you get to the end of the year and you don't have something like this in place, and it's, this is what I thought of your teaching. That's a very personal confrontation versus, this is what I caught this year while I was in your class. Let's talk about how to move your acceptables to goods, maybe your goods to outstandings, and we need to work on the unacceptables if there are any, right? So it's really depersonalized things. And that's kind of what the so what is. The depersonalizing of the tough conversation is it's not about me, it's not about you, it's about what we collectively agreed, because your neighbors on both sides of you have agreed to aim for the good, so there's no reason for you to not get there. We don't expect everybody to be outstanding. Wouldn't it be a wonderful world for kids if everybody was outstanding in everything they did with teaching and learning? But it's not going to happen. But we'll settle for goods moving towards outstanding, for the 1 or 2 acceptables, and certainly no unsatisfactories. We need to work on those people immediately. It's given us the K-12 common language. It's given us a great avenue for data comparison, because now we can disaggregate by divisions, by phases. Instead of the gut feel about how we're doing, we have data that informs that. And to differentiate PD, like I was talking about on the Thursday afternoons, when you take a look at where we're falling behind, what's a little bit lower, and focus PD on those areas, while still pulling in the people who are good and outstanding in those areas to work as teachers teaching teachers in the model. What's next? I'd love to say that it's done and we nailed it on the first go, but we actually feel like we missed a big one up front. And so this is us being very transparent as lifelong learners. What we did, and maybe some of you are kind of smiling on the inside because you might have caught it, in our evidence of teaching rubric, we miss the main purpose of schooling entirely, which is what? Hey, thank you. So I'm glad it was so transparent to you. Where were you guys 10 months ago when we were doing this? What we focused on and what Danielson's second framework focused on, she's now done a third in the last couple of months, almost a year ago now, that is, it's changed towards a learning outcome base. But what our evidence rubric focused on is teacher inputs. But of course we know as leaders, we can be the best leaders in the world, we can think, we can do all the right things, but if people aren't led by us, we're not leading, we're just preaching, right? So what we've done is we've already started the process of taking it from a teacher input model to a learning and student output model. And it's pretty easy to do with the rubric because it describes good practice already. So we go back to something like communication, teacher communication. And it says communicating outcomes. So it would say the teacher effectively communicates the outcome for the lesson and checks on it throughout the course of the class. Well, the teacher can communicate it, but the effectiveness is knowing whether or not walking around you can ask kids, what are you doing today? What's the point? What are you doing next? How are you doing? How did you do before this, right? So all we've done really in a lot of places is cut off teacher will and started the sentence with student. So student can, say what the purpose of the lesson is, da 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 da. It was a downfall of us using Danielson's second model instead of third model, but we didn't have the familiarity on staff with the third model yet, so we felt more confident starting there, and now we know that's a big change for next year. We use PD data a lot better now, so it's really targeted. It's not just gut feel about, well, it feels like we're not doing effective questioning. Now it's, wow, 60% of our people are in acceptable, and that's an area that we need to focus on. And we can now measure the effectiveness of PD a little bit better. So we take one of those Thursday sessions where I'm not doing well at effective questioning. So my principal has suggested to me that I go to the questioning workshop. Then in the next 2 to 3 weeks after that workshop, that principal goes and just checks that element in that teacher's class. A one-off, right? You go in for 5 to 10 minutes, and either it's gone up, or it stayed the same, or it's gone down, right? But then you can measure the effectiveness of your PD, right? That's a part that's always, I would say always, I hate the word always, but almost always missing is the follow-up. So we knew that this was a gap. We gave you PD on it. And how do we make sure that the PD had an effect? How do we know that what we did, what we spent time and money on, how do we know it had an impact on student learning, right? So it's an easy way to follow up, because if you only have to follow up for 5 or 10 minutes in a class, longer if you have it, you can check to see how the teacher used that knowledge effectively. So in making this a little bit useful, your school's not my school. It won't be, it shouldn't be, it can't be, it's its own thing, and we can't claim to tell you how to do everything. But nor should we, because we missed the teaching and learning switch. But what we thought as an SLT was just if you only had the conversation where you used the good column from 3.1, 3.2, and 3.3, and you put it in front of teachers and said, what do we think? What do we believe? Because what happened in a lot of our areas was the Danielson mark for good wasn't good enough for our teachers. They ramped it up themselves. Oh, what a wonderful position to be in, So our teachers had good conversations about, well, I don't think that that's actually good. I think we're beyond that a little bit, right? Recognizing that her work is based around American public schools, and so we're not always working in the same genre, so maybe the expectations are a little bit different. And so if you use the good columns, it might be a good place to start with your staff. If you haven't done that already, just for familiarity with what KHGA is looking for, as well as coming up with a common understanding of what good looks like at your schools. And then the most important part for me, which is in the collaborative element, which is to discuss, disagree, agree, and co-create your own language, K-12 or K-6 or whatever your school is, about what good teaching and learning look like at your school, with as many people as possible. Otherwise, it's not really collaborative, it's dictatorial. More than happy to take questions, because that's where we know that the learning actually happens, not while I just preach at you for 40 minutes. Right. So questions. If you are an Arabic speaker, then Mohammed is here to take the question and translate it into Pidgin English for me. So that's how I speak. Any questions anybody might have? Sure.
A couple of things. One of the concerns with the model is there are so many domains, and then there are the different subsections. So actually managing that over the year, whether to break it down in certain areas of focus. But the other thing, with regard to Danielson, is in North America there is the move to looking at student progress, student attainment, as a big measure of teacher effectiveness?
A tripod for us for assessment, and it's reflected in the literature right now, right? So to take a look at renewing a teacher or taking a look at an end-of-year teacher summary, you take their performance observations, which is all of this stuff. You take a look at progress and attainment, which can be external or internal. Should be a combination of both, because Lord help us if we're only using CATS testing or something like that to base everything on. And the third one that's getting a lot of airtime right now, especially through the Gates Foundation, is the input of students. Not as a summary judgment, but as part of the tripod about what those three things are. So what we're only talking about today is the supervision and growth model. Then the conversation at the end of the year in the summary is taking a look at growth and attainment data. We actually do it twice a year. We do a mid-year check to see how things are going, so that there's corrections for the end of the year. And then at the end of the year. None of those three parts in and of itself would ever have us get rid of a teacher. But it's painting a three-sided picture, right? It's triangulation of what you believe. Because Lord help us if there's some interpersonal dynamics between two people, so this doesn't get reflected. Although this does depersonalize, it still happens. We know that. But if your students are progressing and your students' feedback on you is good, then there's 2 of 3 positives, right? So those are the 3 that we use to triangulate. This is just the one that we were talking about today as a snapshot. To go to the first part, there was a lot of concern about, there's 24 criteria for us. Danielson, I think, was 23. We added that last one. What we found was we divided it up. So planning and preparation, all of domain 1 is essentially done in a pre-observation conference. So in that 30 to 45 minutes, how many people have a pre-observation part built into their formal evaluation model, where you meet with a teacher beforehand, either by just taking their documents, which is how you can do it, or actually talking? That's where planning and preparation gets done, because you've missed the boat on that. You can assume things in planning and preparation from the lesson, but you can't guarantee it. So we have that, so that's about 30 minutes. Then you have the 45 minutes to 60-minute formal observation, and then a 15 to 30-minute debrief. Over the course of the year, it's a lot of time. We do 2 or 3, depending on whether teachers are new to the school or not. So 2 and 3 are done in the class. 4A is done in the post-observation. It's about reflecting on the lesson, whether the teacher knows what they missed. But then 4B through F are done in end-of-year summary only, because it's about service to the school over the course of the year. So that's kind of cut it down to, we actually take a look, I think, at 20 criteria in those 3 phases of a formal observation. So it is a lot. Yeah, it's a lot. Teachers do a lot, right? So there's a lot of stuff we do in a day when nothing is happening. You know? No special event, nothing's going on. Very, very good teacher. And I'm going to say that based on the fact that her formal observations with me have never been above acceptable. But I know through my informals and through my curriculum and my other principal and assistant principal, she's much better. She's just a nervous person when it comes to formal observation. So that's why triangulation is so important, right? The other reality is she could have just had bad lessons when I was there. And so what do? You know what? I'm going to hold this one. I'm going to come back in a week. If it's the same, we have a tough talk. If it's not, then so it's about being fair and equitable. And that's the half where you focus on teacher growth. And I don't mean to be proselytizing, but that's where you focus on teacher growth. If your purpose is formative assessment for teachers, they're much more open to it, right? So you can be in their classroom a lot more. If it's summative and only about supervision, then I think you've maybe missed half of what the supervision is about, right? So really being in the class is more, so they never know when you can jump out from behind the door.
So how many of you they do supervision?
74 of us. No, I'm kidding. The formal observations, two division principals, a secondary and elementary head, and an assistant principal in both divisions. So right now, we're at a point where we're about to add an assistant principal to both divisions because the size has grown to that point. But right now, it's 4 people doing all the formals. It's a lot. The informals are done by curriculum people and other people as well, though.
On the average, how many?
Susan, right?
Yeah.
Guidance counselor. Of a wonderful woman that spoke this morning.
On the average, how many observations, formal and informal, do you feel gives you a really good picture in your school?
For us, all new teachers to the school, not whether you're a novice teacher or an experienced, but all new teachers are 2 or 3, depending on how the 2 went. If you had 2 good observations, I'm done formally observing you for that year because you know your stuff. If one of them didn't go very well, we do a 3rd one. From that year on, you need 1, 2 if there's a problem. But what we haven't talked about in the model is if you're an experienced teacher and you've been with us for more than a year, in your 2nd year you go on to other things, reflective journaling, PD, action research, conference presentations, internal presentations. So there's lots of avenues to honor and respect and not waste your time on people who you know are good and outstanding and already ready, self-regulating after 7 or 8 years of teaching and learning. So 1 to 2 if they're returning, 2 to 3 if they're new to the school.
2 to 3, 1 to 2 in
In a year.
a year.
In a
not
year,
12.
yeah. Because remember, we have lots of other, we have a data check, we have
Yeah.
informal observations,
Informal
lots of pieces to the puzzle.